Hello and welcome to Moving Beyond Sustainability. Today we are going to share with you Nextatlas views about how to design a net zero future. But before we do that, a very quick introduction about the attendees today. So I'm Mario Coletti, Managing Director of Nextatlas in the UK, and together with me I have Debora.
My name is Debora, and I'm a trend researcher and data analyst at Nextatlas.
So Debora will take us through the main content of today's webinar. Before we do that, I also want to give you a short introduction or reminder about who we are and what Nextatlas is. We are a fast-growing MarTech startup that applies artificial intelligence to analyze billions of verbal and visual data from social media networks. And we do that to help our key clients to develop key insights that can help their brand innovation and marketing strategies. Our key objective is to develop foresights and predictions by observing consumer conversation that are happening in various social media networks such as Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, Behance, Reddit, and more. We have developed a specific methodology that by using artificial intelligence, identify what we call the innovators and early adopters within social networks. And today we have a base of almost, or actually more than 300,000 of what we call industry-specific innovators that we constantly follow and observe and listen to, as well as their followers. So we have a base of several millions of consumers that we constantly follow at global level. In fact, the volume of data that we analyze is so large that we actually analyze more than 2.5 million posts every week. And we have developed large cloud of tags and keywords, over 600,000, that we constantly monitor to see the evolution of the conversation that are happening in social media. The benefits of using Nextatlas are several and many. First and foremost, we are probably the unique platform for foresight that is actually supporting foresight with data, and everything that we say is data-driven and statistically relevant. Also, we have our specific methodology. With the specific methodology, we have the ability to analyze the data in a way that is industry-specific, so focused on any kind of a major industry that has a consumer involvement. And the data and information that we develop are always on and always trackable, and we can always check and monitor the evolution of conversations. So within Nextatlas, we have now collected on many years over 500 micro and macro trends about consumer behavior and consumer views about their life, their lifestyle, the product they consume, and so on and so forth. And we have several thousand of insights and facts that we constantly monitor and check, and we follow to see how they evolve. And because that, for quite a while, we have been monitoring one of the key topics that is really at the heart of a consumer, and this is sustainability. Sustainability is something that is very much of high interest for our large community of innovators and early adopters, up to the point that 90% of our community has at some stage had some conversation or made some comments about sustainability. And for this reason, we have actually created within Nextatlas and the Nextatlas platform a new sustainability section. This to help our clients to look at the information, the conversation, and the topics that are relevant to sustainability, and also to help our client to structure and organize views about what does sustainability mean. Sustainability is such a large topic that is very hard to actually discuss about it in depth and with some level of direct kind of impact into the business, unless we dive deep into what are the elements and components of sustainability. And this is a major kind of aspect of the importance of considering and analyzing sustainability down to the details, to avoid that it is actually going to be something that is considered as superficial and just a kind of trendy, fashionable kind of things that everyone need to talk about. So the purpose of having our section on sustainability is really to help our brands to understand what kind of things they should do. Detect the emerging directions that are really relevant for the brands. And they can be different depending on the different industries and so on and so forth, as we will see later, as Debora will actually take us through the findings from Nextatlas. It will give the opportunity to analyze new concepts and understand the evolution of the conversation that is happening amongst consumers. And will also help to evaluate what are the opportunities and therefore what are the key elements or strategies that are relevant for each sector or target groups and so on. So you will be able to find the sustainability section in by accessing our Nextatlas platform. But thanks, Debora. Sorry, I just jumped into that. But if you can move to the next slide. In today's journey, we will actually give you a broad view of what is in Nextatlas, and also give you the directions in terms of what do we think are the key strategic outputs related to sustainability. As I mentioned before, we have organized sustainability in a way that is digestible, readable, and useful in terms of the development of insights. And today's journey will actually take you through those specific elements and how those specific elements have been organized in Nextatlas. So first and foremost, I will give you a view about what are the key dimensions of sustainability, or what we have called the key pillars of sustainability. And then I will hand over to Debora, which will give an interesting view from of sustainability, which will be divided across the value chain, which is relevant and important from the brands, starting from research and development, going down to customer experience and aftercare. So talking about the pillars or the dimension that I mentioned before, in consumer conversation, we are able to identify what is really relevant for them and what they think is impacting their life. And clearly, we have seen and identified that for sustainability, they are highly concerned or highly impacted on three key dimensions, which we have called the pillars of sustainability. Those are the social dimension, which is related to obviously the social life and connection with other consumers, the economic dimension and the impact that they have on their life and on the cost of living and all the different elements of and aspects of economical. And obviously sustainability has a big impact and connection with environment, and what is the impact of any decision or any choice that is made either by a brand or by a consumer toward the impact. This is not just only for today, but also looking at the future. So those three pillars and dimensions obviously are very highly articulated and complex components. And to analyze them, Nextatlas constantly look for what are the key topics and the key subjects that consumers are talking about. By doing that, we have actually developed what we call the tag cloud of sustainability. And what you see here is a presentation of the tag cloud connected and correlated to sustainability. And you see an example of the biggest or highest important term or topics that consumers are actually sharing through social media and are identified within Nextatlas. Those elements or components are constantly dynamically changing within as a top of mind for the consumer. So one of the beauty or the value of Nextatlas is not just only to receive those kind of information one-off, as we are going to do today, but actually to be able to continue see the dynamic change of those topics within the consumer mind. And this is important, obviously, to understand which direction a brand should go and which choices a brand should actually go to in order to be relevant and be credible for the consumer and be preferred by the consumer. Again, considering that this topic is so large and so complex, and also articulated in so many different topics and components and so on, the beauty of artificial intelligence is the ability to combine or understand the correlation of those topics and the ability to organize those topics in a way that are digestible from a brand perspective, from a customer client perspective and so on. So a further level of organization of all this data and information is the one that we have used, and actually Nextatlas has given us the direction from an AI perspective to organize all those topics in what we call the 8 key macro trends related to sustainability. And those key topics are clearly connected to the 3 pillars that I was mentioning before. And all the different word clouds and keywords that we have identified related to sustainability were organized and have been organized within those macro trends to make those topics meaningful, and also to make it easier for you in the use of Nextatlas to make decision and understand which of those topics are the most relevant for your industry. So I wanted to give this kind of overview or introduction just to explain to you how Nextatlas works, and also how to basically organize the data and read the data. But now we will go into the details of that in a way that I just anticipated earlier on. So Debora will take us through the element of sustainability across the value chain. As I mentioned earlier on, we have decided to organize the aspect of sustainability connected to those trends that we have just presented, looking at the different stages that are important for a brand in a brand life, from the real beginning of research and development down to the level of execution and of customer experience and aftercare. So I hope that this is clear for you, but the most exciting part is the one that is actually coming now. So I would like to hand over to Debora to take us through that journey that will be very interesting and very articulated. I just want to say one more thing about, in terms of a sort of a kind of service note. You can actually ask us any question you would like. You will see at the bottom that there is a Q&A option. So you can write your questions in the Q&A, and we will look into those questions, and we will answer to the questions at the end, if time allows. And so we will select key questions at the end, but also we will come back to you later on. All right, so I think that's it for me, and Debora, is all yours.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So research and development is the first stage of the value chain that we'll be exploring today. Just a quick note before jumping into the content, you see that for each chapter, we'll introduce you to a macro trend and then move to minor trends, which in turn will be followed by case studies. And then every chapter is closed with insights to actions, which could be seen as some of our recommendations on how businesses should act on those different trends. So here to start, we'll be talking about tech-enabled resilience. And tech-enabled resilience is a macro trend that talks about the increasing demand for future-proof solutions. It highlights the need to think of sustainability already in the first phases of product or service conception and development. And what we've been seeing in the last years is that the path for a more climate positive future is largely tech driven, and it's infused with innovative solutions. There's an ever growing interest and demand for new technologies, especially those that involve biological systems. So biotechnologies are having a great impact in all sectors. And as our platform shows, mentions of the word biotech has been steadily growing in the last 18 months. So in this context, where new technologies are emerging and innovations are appearing across different industries, the attention to carbon capture technologies has become unprecedented. We've been seeing different initiatives and projects being launched with the goal of sequestering carbon from the atmosphere as a way to kind of mitigate the damages of intense pollution. And there are interesting top keywords emerging with this micro trend, such as renewables, CCS, which is an acronym for carbon capture and sequestration, algae, bioenergy, geoengineering, and so on and so forth. And related to this micro trend, we've also selected a couple of related tags, such as decarbonization and biochar, that showed a boost of interest among the users of the Nextatlas platform. And biochar in special had a significant growth of more than 140% over the last 18 months. And for those who may not be very familiar with the term, it stands for biocharcoal, which is a plant-based charcoal that is stored in the soil as a means of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So you may ask, how can these new carbon capture-based technologies impact the development of a product? Or, well, what if you could actually produce something out of CO2 emissions? And that's exactly what Coletti is trying to do. So Coletti is an American multinational beauty company that owns brands like CoverGirl and Rimmel. And in a partnership with biotech company LanzaTech, Coletti announced that they will use ethanol made from carbon capture emissions in their fragrances, and they're aiming at using it in the majority of its product lines by 2023. The fight against climate change could also start from the food that we eat. So Solar Foods is a Finnish food tech startup that is testing a technology that uses electricity to produce hydrogen, which then is combined with carbon dioxide, water, vitamins, and minerals to feed and grow a biomass that can be used as a edible protein. They created Soylin, which is a vegan protein powder made from microbes that metabolize carbon dioxide. And this powder can be turned into meat and dairy substitutes, or could be even added to foods and shakes as a nutritional supplement. Another micro trend related to this first stage of the value chain is the spread of the so-called competition, meaning the act of cooperation between competing companies. So many brands are acknowledging the fact that real change can only be accomplished if they prioritize innovative solutions and the health of the planet over their own profits. So many companies are embracing this so-called competition, meaning that they are now overlooking their competitive differences and they are collaborating with their rivals in order to make greater changes for a more positive future. Collaborations and cooperations between companies is not at all something new, but seeing how competitors are putting aside their own profits to actually make a difference is quite interesting. And the sustainable value in these practices is quite evident, as the Nextatlas platform shows. Eco-conscious users are the ones talking the most about competitors and cooperation in the advertising and branding industry. Competitions are emerging in different industries. This case study in special comes from the beauty and skincare sector. So recently, the clean skincare brand has partnered with other emerging brands, such as Biossance, Herbivore, Coletti, and Youth to the People on this campaign that they called #WeAreAllies. And this is a campaign focused on finding new planet-friendly packaging solutions. And all these brands committed to introduce better packaging alternatives by 2025. Another major collaboration, this time involving huge fashion brands, is Milo Consortium. So last year, Adidas, the luxury conglomerate Kering, Lululemon, and Stella McCartney have all invested in this experimental new material called Milo, which is produced by a company called Bolt Threads. And it's a leather substitute and is made using the underground mycelium structure of mushrooms. And the interesting thing is that this year, some of these brands already launched products made of Milo. So Adidas, for instance, they announced the Stan Smith Milo, giving a more sustainable twist to their iconic product. So today we focus on two facets of what we call the tech-enabled resilience trend. But there are still many other topics that could be explored, as we've highlighted in the upper right corner of the presentation. You can find other two micro trends and several case studies in our full version report, and here in specific that address to upcycling practices and the development and use of biomaterials. And well, here are some of our recommendations on how businesses should act for this first chapter about research and development. First of all companies should position themselves as change enablers towards a more sustainable future. And that change, that real change, starts from the research and development stage. But in reality, how they achieve that change is quite interesting. As we've seen in the beginning of our webinar, the notion of sustainability is very broad, and there's an evident need to tackle the matter in a 360-degree approach. And we all know that the fighting for a better future is a collective matter that it also crosses all sectors with no exception. So while innovation moves to the top of companies' agendas, we're also seeing that efforts are going beyond the company's walls. So basically, companies need to prove that they put humans and the health of the planet before their own profits with concrete actions that start right here in the research and development stage. Now, moving to the second step of the value chain, we get to the design and production stage. And the macro trend chosen for this chapter is called a matter of reduction. The idea sustaining this trend is quite simple. It's fewer but better. It means that decisions are increasingly being taken in a more considerate way. And whatever is being perceived as unnecessary is now being avoided or replaced. That's of course not a secret, but the key takeaway here is that this responsible approach towards the planet and the future may also have impacts on visual considerations. So mounting concerns over the future are triggering the revival of softer and warmer forms of minimalism, especially in product and packaging design. In fact, as our AI machine shows, the tech soft in art and design had a growth of more than 50% mentions in the last 18 months. And another interesting phenomenon that we are keeping an eye on is that while in real life, in the physical world, there's an increasing demand for more intuitive and straightforward usage of products, in the virtual world, we are seeing more and more over the top, exaggerated features and almost no restraints to creativity. Soft minimalism is an aesthetic that we've been seeing popping up in different industries lately, and is an aesthetic that illustrates really well this idea that sustainable values are radiating out into the aesthetic field. And is an aesthetic that is all about this extra care given to the choice of materials, to this attention to its sources and production processes. Those are the elements that actually give visual cues that something is designed in a sustainable way. And when we're talking about this aesthetic, there's an intrinsic characteristic of being inviting and comforting at the same time. So nothing is rigid or cold or even aseptic, but rather everything is presented with rounded shapes, warmer and natural materials. This care for sourcing and sustainable design thinking are evident in in the data that we collected on our platform. So both sourced and sustainable design had more than 50% growth in usage over the last 18 months on our platform. A case study that translates really well this soft minimalism aesthetic is Sonny's original blended material. It is a durable paper material that has less of an impact on the environment than virgin plastics. Here we see reduction of cushioning and packaging materials, reduced ink use, and no unnecessary coloring as some of the approaches that the company used to communicate sustainable efforts to customers and make them more aware of the environment. Another case study now related to retail strategies is Google's first ever physical store that has recently opened in New York City. So every element of the Google store, from materials, building processes, to mechanical systems, was carefully considered and selected. So for example, each lighting fixture is energy efficient, and the custom cork and wood furniture was created with the local craftsmen in Brooklyn. Even the carpeting, which was manufactured with recycled materials, was attached in a sustainable way. It's an example of how values of sustainability can be translated into visual considerations. The video shows us glimpses of the space. Every element here in the store communicates a design based on sustainable thinking. And here again, reduction is not interpreted as something cold, aseptic, but rather there's a more inviting take on minimalism. So if we are moving towards reduction, to cutting back whatever is not strictly necessary, what's waiting for us in the end of the line? What about dematerialization and the idea that the object is no longer material, at least in the physical world? So in the last year or so, with the pandemic outbreak, we've seen lots of discussions about the virtual world, about the concept of digital, where boundaries of digital and physical worlds blur, and even about the emergence of the so-called metaverse. Both phygital and metaverse on the Nextatlas platform are tags that had a noteworthy growth of mentions. And so here we brought this micro trend about virtual items to illustrate this idea of dematerialization of objects that could be connected with this urge for more sustainable practices and consumption habits. So the first case about virtualization of objects that we wanted to share today is Tribal Brand. It is a high-end digital fashion brand. And the interesting thing about this case is actually to see how they position themselves in the market. The brand states that with no need for physical deliveries and production, their products are available without restrictions for any gender, sex, or size. And the company aims at improving the social impact of the fashion market by making it more accessible and fairer. And the brand also says it aspires to change consumption behaviors in a more sustainable way. We are seeing examples of virtualizations in other industries beyond fashion. So Andres Resiner is an Argentinian designer who sold 10 pieces of virtual furniture in an online auction. And each of the virtual items can be placed in any shared 3D virtual space or open worlds, such as Decentraland and Somnium Space and Minecraft. So alternatively, these 3D models can be used to create games, animations, and CGI movies. So far, we've seen two different ways of understanding how the value of sustainability can be used as a key driver for design and production processes. But beyond that, we've also gathered some interesting content regarding imperfect raw materials and even reusable packaging on our full report. Now, when it comes to insights to action for design and production, the first one is quite straightforward. Sustainability is a matter of substance and form. Now, throughout this chapter, we've seen two extremes of this overarching trend called a matter of reduction. If on one hand, in the physical world, you have this reduction of whatever is not necessary, on the other hand, you see experimentation and almost unrestrained creativity manifested in the virtual world. So in a few words, sustainable values should run through the company and guide decision-making, so substance, and finally, also be evident in forms and design considerations that stick to those values. Once we have passed the phases of research, development, design, and production, we enter a third extremely important step, marketing and communication. Environmental accountability is the third macro trend of today's webinar, and it talks about the importance of communicating effectively sustainable practices and activities. So at least once, while reading or discussing about sustainability, you may have come across the term greenwashing to refer to false promotions or overstatements about the environmental or even ethical value of a product, an initiative, or a project. And it's really something that all businesses should be paying attention nowadays, because today, thanks to the internet and all sorts of digital tools out there, it's quite easy to verify if an information is true or not. So what we've been seeing on social media streams is that the key value that every company and brand should be embracing right now is transparency. And the Nextatlas platform confirms it. The word transparency in advertising and branding has been steadily growing by 47% in the last 18 months. And we also saw in the beginning of the webinar how the notion of sustainability is becoming more and more granular, and everything is connected, and even other parts where certain topics overlap. So there's an increasing expectation and demand for brands to actually make efforts, to make their efforts evident and verifiable at a granular level. This trend is really a convergence of different aspects. So we're talking about communicating with transparency. We are talking about understanding this granularity of sustainable practices. And we're talking about paying attention to every single detail, even the means and tools used in communication strategies. And that's because brand accountability means more than just tight marketing. Brands are expected to change their practices and to use their power and influence to ignite real change. As Mario was explaining in the beginning of the webinar, there are two major pillars of sustainability are the economic and the social aspect. And this micro trend about the continuous interest and support for local initiatives is a good example of a phenomenon in the intersection of those two pillars. The data collected on our platform confirms the fact that support for the local movements is far from fading away. And tags such as support local and communities in food and beverage had an impressive boost of interest over the last months. The microtrend in itself is largely commented by users who present eco-conscious values at the top of their interests. Coletti beer is the premium brand of CBN, the National Bolivian Brewery. And the brand launched the Huari Causa, a campaign that will use its efforts to revitalize national crafts, such as ancestral fabrics. So for years, the brand has been implementing actions that have contributed to the development of rivers. And it's actually a very interesting example of how a company supports an initiative that, in a way, is not really part of their core business. It actually also resonates a lot with the insights to action for the research and development stage that we've seen earlier today, where we talked about businesses moving beyond their own walls. Another case study related to this microtrend is the New York-based startup Bond that offers delivery and distribution centers to e-commerce distribution center services to e-commerce companies. Now, Bond wants to replace traditional package delivery with hyperlocal services using electric trikes. And the way they operate is really the key. So the startup is opening a series of small warehouses in basements and storefronts in the hopes of making urban delivery quicker, but also lower emission. Even the communication with the client changes. There's much more flexibility with this hyperlocal offering when compared to big delivery companies. Usually undelivered packages end up going back to distribution centers that oftentimes are miles away from the delivery address. But with Bond, communication becomes almost personalized. Everything is made via texts. And so there's much more flexibility to decide meeting points and alternative times for last minute changes. A quick parenthesis on this case is that this downsizing of distribution systems is quite interesting also when you think of all the supply chain issues that we've seen lately. So maybe you recall earlier this year, the Suez Canal obstruction and all the transportation issues caused by the pandemic crisis that showed how little resilient are the global supply chains. So it really showed how turning to local suppliers and producers is not only a more eco-friendly approach towards the environment, but it could also mean more sustainable strategies for the company. The second micro trend for the marketing and communication chapter is about digital pollution. People are becoming increasingly aware of the fact that there's an environmental cost for every single online activity, from the electricity required to power our devices to the energy needed to run data centers and servers. In fact, our platform shows that conversations revolving around this topic have received a lot of attention in the past months. So mentions of carbon and digital on social media streams have been growing by 180% over the last 18 months, while minting in the tech industry grew over 800% on Nextatlas. Minting, for those who may not be quite familiar with the term, is defined as the computer process of validating an information, creating a block, and then recording that information into the blockchain. This growing concern over digital pollution has started to push a few companies to actually rethink their communication strategies. For instance, research-based design studio Forma Fantasma has worked with Studio Blanco to design a website that minimizes CO2 emissions resulted from navigating the internet. So the interface uses system typefaces, avoiding unnecessary HTTP requests. And there's also a dark mode that reduces energy consumption. And the website's domain is powered by a tailor-made platform with significantly lower impact on server-side resource consumption. A very similar case is Volkswagen Canada's carbon efficient website that the company launched to promote its all-electric SUV. So working with creative agency Taxi Toronto, the company launched this new interactive website that uses less energy and overall reduces carbon emissions. The website removed all its car photographs and replaced them with black and white texts to create illusions of the vehicle. The result is a website that has a cleaner carbon footprint than 99% of the 2 million pages that they tested with this digital carbon emissions calculator called website carbon. There are other interesting phenomena related to this micro trend called environmental accountability, such as digital tools and traceability, as well as support to grassroots activism. But no matter what is the sustainable initiative or cause that is being supported or adopted, transparency is a key value that should be guiding marketing and communication strategies. So simply put, transparency should be seen as a communication asset. Brands should assume this position where they communicate their practices and values by providing tools that actually empower consumers and help them make better choices of consumption. Sustainability-driven storytelling can start from showing care to local communities and extend all the way to the digital realm. It's really a wide range of topics that could be covered, which is why we highlighted the need for adaptable strategies that can be used as means to promote different causes, even involve local players and communities, as we saw with the microtrend. And today, even the means and the tools that are being used to communicate and market a product, a service, or a value are being put into question. Again, we've seen how future-proof practices are moving towards granularity. So it makes a lot of sense that even EdTech campaigns should be considered carefully according to its environmental footprint. This is our last stop today, customer experience and aftercare. Many of you may have already heard the expression closing the loop, which refers to the circular economy. And it's an expression that has been around for a couple of years now. And it simply means that nothing is wasted. Forward-thinking businesses are they have already started acting on this circular economy, offering customer experience and aftercare services that can permeate the lives of consumers even after the moment of product purchase. What we've been seeing out there is that more and more companies are embracing this idea that the act of purchase is not the final goal. These businesses are actually investing in building up long-term relationships and fostering loyalty among consumer bases. And the way that they're acting is the interesting part to be analyzed. And this chapter is all about that, about the different retail strategies, especially focused on designing out waste and overconsumption. We've been seeing a continuous interest in buyback programs, with companies in different sectors implementing such services, but especially in fashion and in the design sectors. It's a micro trend that is mostly commented by eco-conscious users, followed by civil rights activists and experimenters. And interestingly, Gen X and Gen Zers are the demographic groups that show more interest in the topic. Vestiaire Collectif is a French luxury resale marketplace that has recently introduced its brand-approved buyback program in collaboration with fashion designer Alexander McQueen. So past season pieces can be returned to participating boutiques in exchange for store credit to shop the brand's current collection. And those return pieces are then resold online. When you see an item listed with the brand approved badge, it means that that item has been assessed by both the e-commerce platform and the brand before being made available. So this case is quite interesting, not just for the fact that they are implementing this buyback program, but also for this underlying strategy of building trust with consumers. So with this badge, secondhand purchases of authentic products becomes much more reliable. Sabai is an American furniture brand that has recently launched the Sabai Standard, and it's a new buying back program of its own products. The company offers a percentage of the resale pricing credit or even in cash. And then the company resells the product under its pre-owned section called Sabai Revive. It's true that a handful of brands like Pottery Barn and Koyuchi have already worked with returned textile, but furniture um, has always been trickier because of the costs involving shipping, storage, and pickup. But Sabai found a company called Found, which handles the returns of oversized and bulky items for e-commerce brands to create a more viable solution and ultimately a more budget-friendly and eco-conscious offer for its customers. Another micro trend that we've been monitoring on our platform is the increasing interest in the right to repair movement. And the idea behind it is very simple. When you own something, you should be able to repair it at your own terms. Either you repair it yourself or you take it to a technician of your choice. And this concept is rather common when we are talking about cars and appliances, but here it refers to modern tech. It refers to your computer, to your phone, and your tablet. It's a topic largely commented by eco-conscious users on our platform. And there are different objectives behind the right to repair movement that range from making the information available, but not only, also the parts and tools needed for that. And it extends all the way to actually embracing that idea already in the design stages, becoming an intrinsic feature of the product. It's an interesting microtrend because it has a lot to do with sustainability and this idea of prolonging the life cycle of products. But it also resonates a lot with another trend that we've been seeing gaining a lot of traction lately, especially during the months of lockdown, that is the do-it-yourself trend. And it's true that the movement has roots in the tech world, but if you think about it, you can apply this concept to other consumer goods, as we'll see in a while. To illustrate this micro trend, we selected this first case that emerged in the tech world. Framework is a San Francisco-based startup that has recently launched the Framework laptop. It's a high-performance notebook that can be upgraded, customized, and repaired. It is to be the company's very first product, and it includes custom-built hardware features that no other company had ever offered. So basically, it's a DIY computer with modular parts that you can repair and upgrade. As I was saying earlier, we could even transpose the right to repair concept to other industries. IKEA, for instance, is planning on selling parts of its furniture. So the company already offers screws and handles for free to help customers repair their furniture. But now the firm is looking at selling actual parts of furniture, such as sofa legs and armrests. IKEA in itself as a brand is actually an interesting case study because it has been launching different aftercare services that are pretty much in line with this idea of closing the loop that we talked in the beginning of this chapter. Besides offering replacement parts, the company already had been working with secondhand furniture and buyback programs of selected products. The microtrends and the different case studies of this chapter lead us to this final insights to action. Integrating circularity-driven services can reaffirm meaningful relationship with consumers, extending these relationships to even after the moment of purchase. And there are several strategies that could be considered, and that's why we talk about post-purchase options in the plural. Today we talked about buyback programs and the right to repair movement, but there are other practices that can actually help design out waste and overconsumption, such as aftercare services in general. such as repairing, as well as rental programs. So today we have covered 4 different areas of the value chain. And we did give you ideas of insights to action for each stage of the value chain. But we've also identified a couple of overarching considerations. And we can start from the upper right corner of your screen. So first, sustainability should be addressed as a value. What we wanted to highlight here is that sustainability as a value should permeate through through corporate culture. It should have impacts on decision making, and it should involve every single department within the company. Second, there is a question about timeframes that is also very important to highlight. Sustainable values should be integrated to long-term strategical plans and not just isolated initiatives or projects. Think of all the case studies that we've presented today. Many of them, if not all of them, were projects that spanned for years. So for truly relevant sustainable plans, a great amount of planning, time, and of course, economic efforts is needed. Third, transversal and incremental approach is key. We organized the webinar today in 4 major chapters, each talking about a different step of the value chain, but it was a way to put some order and to organize this huge topic called sustainability. But in practical matters, future-proof strategies need to cross all stages of the value chain. It should be really tackled with a 360-degree approach. And finally, the future belongs to regenerative trends. And when we're talking about regenerative trends, we mean companies that show the capacity and the willingness to fix problems beyond their own core businesses. And we wanted to introduce this concept of regeneration here because looking back at all stages of the value chain, plus the trends and the case studies that we've presented today, we see this common thread. And this common thread is the fact that companies are moving from their own walls to find solutions for past mistakes, answers to current issues, and better strategies for more positive futures. And with this, we arrive in the end of our journey. We can maybe go to the Q&A session.
Thanks, Debora. Thank you very much. That was a fascinating journey across multiple industries and so many thoughts and so much food for thoughts that you have given to us. And sorry, I'm actually taking time and gaining some time because I'm looking at the Q&A now and collecting them and selecting. There are so many different questions coming out that I wanted to select the one that are let's say the most interesting for us. Obviously, we will answer to all your questions by email, also those that we will not be able to answer right now. But there's a question for you here, which I think is quite relevant, which is related to Generation Z. How much they are the real drivers of the topic around sustainable, and which is the most important aspect of sustainability that, in your opinion, and obviously in Nextatlas' opinion, will make a brand credible to this younger generation?
Well, indeed, Gen Zers are often referred as the most vocal generation for sustainable matters. And we talked about the importance of adopting a transversal and incremental approach to sustainability. And the idea is that for truly relevant, sustainability-driven strategical plans, all steps of the value chain should be guided by sustainable thinking. That said, it's true also that there's a generational difference on how sustainability is perceived and discussed. Gen Zers are vocal about sustainability, but they are also tech-driven, and they are immersed on the internet. So for them, it's pretty easy to find out if something is legit or not. So communication and marketing strategies could be thought of as one of the priorities when you're targeting Gen Zers and you're tackling the topic of sustainability. But if we think of the micro trends that we presented today, I think there are a couple of them that could be also very interesting when you're targeting younger generations. The buyback program and rental programs could be something that could be explored with positive outcomes. Because the notion of repairing products and prolonging the life cycle of objects it's quite interesting. And when you think of all the trends that we've been hearing about, such as the DIY movement and the mending and upcycling trends, mostly in fashion, but also in food, that gain traction over the years.
So that leads into another question, which obviously has a connection with regenerative branding, which potentially is a challenge for brands that are actually selling food and beverages and these kind of things. So on the journey we have just taken, we have seen that basically sustainability is relevant across any category, I would say, and we could say this clearly. And then particularly at the beginning, you were actually sharing a very interesting case study about food and protein and the future use of new kind of food actually to sort out the famine in the world and so on. But beyond that, obviously nobody can, not everyone can do that. What are the most important sustainability item or agendas that the food and beverage industry should consider?
So yeah, I totally agree. Almost all my macro and micro trends that we presented today, sustainability should be thought in across all the steps of the value chain. When I think of the macro and the micro trends that we presented, many of them could have actually applications and implications in the food industry. There are for sure certain territories that could be more interesting to explore or maybe more important to be addressed. You were talking about the first case. So for sure, research and development is one of them. We haven't talked about it in the webinar, but there's an increasing interest in upcycling practices as well in the food industry, thinking of ways to reduce food waste that can, of course, be part of the research and development stage of the value chain. But we also saw applications of food waste in designing production processes as well. So it's quite interesting to see how we can overlap. We've seen a lot of about ugly food, imperfect food on the internet in the last years, and there's a bunch of companies that their whole core business is based on recycling food waste to produce other edible products or any other type of products. Well, and beyond that, another interesting territory to explore would be definitely marketing and communication strategies. Today we had a focus on the support local. I talked about the beer case study, and we saw that many of these established companies with global influence, they are launching these projects focusing on smaller and local communities. So we didn't delve into the traceability and verifiability topics, but those are really key topics for the food and beverage industries. Again, the vocabulary of sustainability is becoming granular, articulated. It's really complex, as Mari was saying in the beginning. And so there's so many nuances you need to keep in mind when you are communicating your sustainable values and practices. And in particular for food and beverage industry, with all these issues about sourcing, fair trade, labor, this topic of verifiability is quite important. And we've been seeing a lot of the impact of technology in this matter. A lot of case studies of blockchain technologies being applied to trace edible products, sources, and production chains.
Thanks, Deborah. So I think we're running out of time and there are still a few questions or more questions to answer. I just want to pick up one as last one, and I think is something that a question that I can answer, which is related to the beginning when we spoke about the 8 macro trends and how actually Nextatlas selecting those macro trends. How did we come out with, and what was our process actually to identify those macro trends? And I would say that actually this is a beauty of Nextatlas. We don't do that. Is the artificial intelligence that is doing that. Is by analyzing and listening and looking at what consumers are talking about and giving us the inputs and the feeds in order to identify and organize those topics. And those topics are highly dynamic. So this is a principle of Nextatlas, constantly monitoring the conversation and actually basically marking or giving a score to the conversation, change and monitoring the change of the importance of those conversations across different across the audiences of consumers. And what we constantly update there are the macro trends and also the conversation that are following and connected to the macro trends by basically letting the technology work and letting the consumer talk to us through their social network feeds and so on. There is another point that is also connected to a question that we have received related to so many different use cases that we have presented today, which are mostly coming from consumer goods and private companies. This is actually where and what is keen and close to the consumer, and the consumer like to talk about. That doesn't mean that everything and all the topics that we have covered are not relevant also for other industries that maybe are lower engagement industries for consumers, and therefore there is less quantity of data or information related to that. All the aspects of sustainability that we present are at the heart of the consumer, and the kind of direction and views that we can see them are important in the private sector as well as important for the public sector as well. And therefore anything that could be learned from those private companies or from the use cases that we have presented can actually be applied outside on other industries and other brands. So again, there are a few more questions that we would like to answer, but also we want to stay put and close to our promise of taking an hour of your time. I would really like to thank you for joining us today. And there are a few things that you can do. You can actually go back and listen to the session again if there are a few things that maybe you have missed during the session. Maybe you received a phone call or whatever. We will send you the full recording by link by email, so you can download the video and go back to the recording again and maybe come back to us with more questions. You can also share the full report that will be sent to everyone that has a license to Nextatlas. The report is can also be bought by the people that are, or customers, clients that are not today part of Nextatlas. But we would like anyone to become a user of Nextatlas and join us in our community. And if you want to discover more about the Nextatlas platform, you will receive an email from us with a link, and we can organize a call and a demo, and we can take you through how Nextatlas work and see how can be valuable and useful for you. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Deborah, for today's presentation and very insightful kind of stories. Again, stay connected, because we will have many more events also and many more stories to share with you, and look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Goodbye.
Bye.